Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am a state councilor of China, Liu Yanhua. I'm going to be moderating the panel number 4, and our topic is commercializing innovative discoveries. Let's first have from IBM, Ms. Kathleen Kinscott, to give us her presentation. Ms. Kinscott has been working for IBM for a long time. She started from the head of global innovation, where she was responsible for international innovation. She also taught innovation classes in universities. Today, her topic is U.S. commercialization of innovative discoveries.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Kissinger Institute for the opportunity to be here today. It's a pleasure, and I guess what happens at the end of the day is, as is often said, everything has been said, but not everyone has had a chance to say it. So I hope that what I can do here today is bring a slightly different perspective in terms of speaking from the point of view of a company as opposed to that of a government. And first, I would like to just touch on a couple of things that I've observed throughout the day, and these aren't topics that are really in my remarks, but I think they're important points. One has to do with a comment that was made earlier about companies not necessarily wanting to have interns, and I think that is, at least in my company's case, not necessarily true. I think it's really important, and my company, IBM, feels like it's really important to have people from all age groups and all interest levels involved in the business and learning about the business. As a matter of fact, my daughter is an intern, and she was here earlier this morning, so working for the SIA. So I think that's not my company, but it's a company in the industry, and I was really pleased to see that, and we have another intern here from the SIA. Second point I'd like to make was I noticed the young lady earlier spoke in Chinese, and I think that is really important, and thank you for doing that. And I'll make another reference to my daughter. She's 19 and has been in her 5th year of Chinese now. So I think that's we as Americans really need to overcome the gap of our language shortcomings and make the effort to be more attuned to the global environment. And so I applaud the use of English by our Chinese colleagues, and I wish I could speak Chinese. So with that, let me begin. And what I'd like to do this afternoon is talk about how a company looks at the challenge of commercializing technology, and what is an approach, a process for doing that, as opposed to just sort of single-handedly picking technologies out of the wind. And so that's the way I'd like to think about it this morning. And just to put this on the table and to set a ground floor, in the IBM company, and I think this is true of lots of companies, and so I'll use my experience in IBM as a reference point, but I think the important points here apply to a lot of global companies. And so we look at innovation and invention and commercialization as being different parts of a process, and we see invention as being the outcome of research, and then innovation as being a way to take those inventions and apply them to society and apply them to solving problems. And the question around commercialization comes in terms of how do you take those innovative outcomes, products and services, and which ones do you select to put into practice. And so that's the way I'd like to approach it, and I hope it's useful to you all. And why this is all is important at the end of the day is this whole process of invention, innovation, commercialization, from at least our company's point of view, is geared toward increasing the standard of living and doing something important in the world and for our society. So let's start with one half of the equation, or maybe it's not even an equal half. It's not a half, but it's a very important portion of the equation, which is what does the federal government do and how does a federal, at least in the United States, how does the government approach innovation? And a big piece of that is, of course, its investment in research and development. And at least here in Washington, I think that in the so-called R&D community, there is a very, very strong focus on levels of investment by various government agencies in research, whether it's in basic, applied, or in development. And that research investment is spread across a whole variety of agencies, which you can see here on the chart. And of course, the Department of Defense is the largest research development and applied agency. But that's a lot of that is actually in development of platforms. And so it's really a little bit divorced from the true basic and applied research area. NIH, the National Institutes of Health, also is a major performer of basic research and applied research. And then you can see how this is all divided up among the various agencies. And I think one of the unique things about the American R&D or investment is that it is mission-oriented for the most part. These investments in research really reflect the job that the agencies have to perform. And so it's a very, very broad portfolio. And somebody raised the point earlier today about whether or not we in the United States would benefit from having a Department of Science. And frankly, my perspective, and I think the IBM company's perspective, is no, we like having the very broad set of R&D activities taking place across all of these mission-oriented agencies. And if we only focused on one, through a Department of Science, we would be very narrow as opposed to very, very broad. And I think another really important point from our point of view is that there's a lot of unexpected or serendipitous good that comes out of this very broad portfolio. And for instance, in the case of IBM, we won the Nobel Prize for developing the scanning tunneling microscope. And that was really developed for semiconductor technology, but it got applied most usefully in research on AIDS. So it's these kinds of unexpected outcomes that make our science and technology enterprise all that much richer. So we have in the U.S. a lot of basic and applied research, but we also have a number of very large programs. Sometimes we would at IBM think they should be larger, that try to bridge the gap between the private sector and the public sector. And so we talked about some of these earlier today. I was really surprised to hear that in China, the R&D tax credit is 150% of what you invest in research, because in the United States, it's a very small percentage of the incremental investment. So it's, there's just no comparison between the R&D credit in China and the R&D credit in the United States. And we've talked at length today about intellectual property. I don't think this can be underscored sufficiently. And I come at this from the point of view of a company that is the leader in patents in the United States for the last 19 years in a row and has well over 4,000 patents a year for the last 6 or 8 years. I'm not sure the exact number. But the point is, and I see Bruce Lehman, who's been very involved in patents in the United States for a long time and globally, that how a country approaches intellectual property from the point of view its actual patenting process, and the enforcement aspect of this. It's not just the creation of the patents. It's not just the recognition of the rights. It's the active enforcement in a very aggressive way that's very important, and how a company practices its business in many cases is dependent upon the intellectual property enforcement in a country. And so I'll just leave it at that because we've had a lot of discussion in that area already. Initiatives to bridge the gap between public and private. Frankly, I think the Obama administration has come a long way in doing that, because you have these two engines of innovation, of entrepreneurship, that may not necessarily be connected. And some of these bridge the gap programs, such as the recently announced National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, which is funded this year at $45 million in the United States. It's a collaborative arrangement between Department of Defense, Department of Energy, NASA, Commerce, and one other agency I can't think of, to try to focus on a particular industry sector. This is a very important program. In the next year, and we'll see what happens with the budget, but there's a request for $1 billion next year, next fiscal year, to create more of these manufacturing institutes. And I think that's a very useful thing. And we have a shortfall now. We have it affectionately called the Valley of Death, but what it really means is it's very hard for innovations to get out of the research lab and into the marketplace. And these kinds of programs help that to happen. Just in April, the administration announced the National Bioeconomy Blueprint, and they laid forth a number of activities that they're trying to pursue that will push forward the biotech sector. And only last week, the administration announced collaborative innovation prizes, and somebody mentioned the value of prizes earlier this morning, and I thought, well, that's kind of neat. And so this collaborative innovation prize is a body of work that's taking place between the United States, U.S. administration, and a bunch of private sector nonprofits to select or to lay out opportunities for individual entrepreneurs to go after certain goals and create technology. And I think that's really neat, and it's worked in a variety of programs to date. So I think these are just some of the things that happen in the U.S. federal program. But what I'd really like to mention here is that as a global company thinks about where and what to commercialize, there are a lot of factors that come into play. And how nations approach these multifaceted issues in terms of their own public policies have a big impact on where companies choose to invest and what they choose to invest. So, for instance, somebody mentioned earlier this morning around metrics. I mean, how do you evaluate what the outcomes of research programs? This is a very important thing that it's a very important way of looking at a return on investment that affects what companies choose to do. Labor policies, tax policies. We just talked about the R&D policy, R&D tax credit policy, or the corporate tax rates. All of these kinds of policies have a huge impact on where somebody chooses to invest, because at the end of the day, the facts remain. We have a global infrastructure that is growing, that makes it possible to locate in lots of different places where even 10 years ago wouldn't be possible to do. So what become the determining factors in locational choice? One of them has to do with the infrastructure that's in place, the telecom infrastructure, the electrical grid infrastructure, the energy infrastructure. Another has to do with the skills. Where are the skills that you need to develop your technology? And then what are the policies that either encourage or discourage investment? And so all these aspects of globalization, of commercialization, come together and create a window through which companies look and make choices around where they invest and what they choose to commercialize. And so I won't go into the details of all of these because we've talked about a number of them in much greater detail already, but I think it's really important to think very broadly about public policy in terms of commercialization and innovation choice. So let me go to another side of the commercialization equation, and that has to do with the private sector side. The point was made earlier this morning that in China, something like 70% of the R&D comes from the private sector. I didn't realize that, and I was happy to learn it. In the United States, it's about the same, although not quite 70% of R&D comes from the private sector, but about 66, two-thirds of the research in the United States comes from the private sector, one-third comes from the public sector. And so what I'd like to do now is focus on private sector and give you some thoughts about that. And this goes to the point here I'd like to make has to do with how a company looks at choices and approaches the process around commercialization and innovation. And we've been thinking about this, we in the IBM company, and I think in companies at large, have been thinking about this very intensely for at least 7 or 8 years. I mean, in the IBM company, with Debbie Van Opstal and others at the Council on Competitiveness, IBM helped to lead the National Innovation Initiative in 2003 and 2004. And so that was kind of the impetus for a lot of constructive thought, at least on our part. And so these are some of the conclusions we've reached over that period of time. And I think one of the most important is that innovation really comes from the market. It's not something that can be imposed by a choice, a government choice. We can't select, in our opinion, a technology and just drive the innovation around it. We have to look at what's happening in the world and figure out how to approach what's happening in the market. Maybe you can shape what's happening in the market. Maybe you can work collaboratively with others to shape what's happening in the market. And you have to look across a whole variety of disciplines, because at least in our world, what we're trying to do is not just create a technology, but what we're trying to do is solve problems. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the folks, frankly, who have focused on just creating a technology, in many cases they've gotten left behind. I mean, if you think about, I mean, why did IBM get out of the PC business? It became a technology that was becoming commoditized, and so we got out of the PC business. Why did we get out of the memory business? Same thing. You know, memory was becoming commoditized. Look at the companies that are in the PC business. They're having except for Apple. Apple is the exception, right? But if you look at Dell, if you look at HP, they're having a lot of trouble making a profit on a commoditized product. So you look at the storage business now. That's basically become a commodity kind of a business. So our experience says we need to look at that high value space, the big problem set space, if we're going to be successful. And our goal is to be successful and to be a leader. And so we have to solve problems, not just make technology. And in order to do that, we have to look very broadly. We have to be in touch with the market. We have to look at what the best of the best in the world can do, and not just what happens in our little neck of the world. And so what we have come to believe is that you don't need a department of innovation, or you don't need a department of science. What you need is a culture that encourages people to be long-term in their thinking, that encourages them to look at big problems, that encourages them to find the way to lead forward and not just be looking at bits and bytes. You know, most people think of IBM, at least traditionally, as a hardware and software company, but we really are a solutions company, a services company. And that's, I think, if you look at the most successful innovative companies in the world today, you will find that they have that characteristic. They're solving big problems. They're not just making a piece of hardware. So let me give you an example of how you play that out. And I'd also want to make sure I stay in my time frame. So IBM is a company that is, I think, well known for its research enterprise. We have over 3,000 employees around the world that are in the research division. And actually, since this chart was made, we've added 2 new research labs, one in Brazil and one in Australia. Our first research lab's actually below the equator, and this was a really important point. This is forcing ourselves to go into the world and to do what's not necessarily comfortable, and to find the best and the brightest and to reach out to them. But we can't do this by ourselves, and as a matter of fact, we do it in we do our research, not only our research, but our move into the market in a very collaborative way with our partners, and with our partners, whether they're in the private sector, whether they're in the public sector, they may be in the university sector, they may be in the nonprofit sector. But what we try to do is to find those organizations, and I use that word carefully, not company, not government, not whatever, but organizations that are in a leadership role in whatever the problem set happens to be. And then we try to find ways to team with them and to collaborate with them so that we can bring into our world the richness that they are experiencing in the marketplace. And so then what we've really said to ourselves is what we think we're trying to do is redefine what science and technology is all about. And we're really trying to do is find the biggest problems, the most useful things we can do with the capabilities that we have, and use the world as our lab, not just sit in the lab, but be a part of the lab, be a part of the world, and have that be the place where the learning happens. And do that learning and creation and commercialization on the most useful things for society. And so you've probably seen our ads all over the place around the smarter planet. The kinds of problems that we're addressing there really include a whole variety of things, whether it's healthcare or energy usage or transportation. I mean, who hasn't been annoyed by a traffic jam, right? Every place you go in our world, people are tied up in traffic. And so this is actually, it might sound mundane, but it's actually one of the most complicated problems that you can think of. And everybody in the world seems to appreciate getting out of a traffic jam. So, so this is the way we're changing and trying to be useful and trying to figure out what to commercialize. And then, so there's a real, when you're looking at problems, the challenge becomes, wow, how do you create a process that is sustainable and that you can replicate time and again, and that you can actually put some metrics around it and to be, to learn from what you've done in the past. So what we've done is we've created this process that we call the General Technology Outlook process. And it's a manner, it's a mechanism by which we can scan what's happening in the world, understand the technology and services and people that we have, and apply that very large diaspora to big problems. And so I'll just take you briefly through how we do it, because I think it's instructive in the whole idea around commercialization. So this is a very basic outline, but basically we've been doing this for over 10 years now. And we look at what we call customer pain points, i.e., what are the most important things that our clients are telling us about the biggest problems that they have. And we try to identify them every year. We start, in January, and we look at, okay, what is it that so-and-so, such and such an organization is dealing with? And we have clients all over the world, so we're talking with all of them. And then we bring those, and you saw the labs that we have and the collaborative players, and we bring that all together in a somewhat semi-organized fashion, and we say, okay, here are the most important, the most pressing problems, and how can we organize that? What are the trends that we see? What are the scenarios? Is there anything that just jumps out at us and says, wow, that's something new we hadn't thought about before? And then we say, well, what's the impact on IBM, and what's the impact that IBM can bring? So it's a double-sided approach. And then we say, okay, now that we've sort of gone through all of these big ideas, how can we organize this even more tightly, which is what is the impact on business of the problems that we're identifying, what's the impact on society, and is this going to drive technology forward? And so then we sift through all this. This doesn't just happen overnight. It's a very iterative, collaborative, painful, but sometimes exciting process. And we run this by our global executive team, our global research teams, and then we come up with some conclusions, and then we take it out to our clients and to our customers and to our partners and say, here's what we're thinking. Can you help us think through this and give us your response to it, and are we on the right track or the wrong track? And so I lay out this schematic because I think it's important to understand that these areas where we're working now, for instance, in the smarter planet or in big data or how do you use analytics, they didn't just fall out of the sky, but they have come across time in a process, and it's been an iterative thing. It's not like we picked the technology It's not like we said we're going to be work stream or workload optimized systems. We didn't say we're going to do that today. We learned over a 10-year period of time that this was something that was important and useful, and it was an enabling tool for the rest of what we wanted to do in the IBM company. And so today, these are the areas where we are putting our attention. I think it has to do with large data, big data. I think we are all kind of overwhelmed with data. I mean, how many Twitter feeds can you read? When you multiply that times the billions of people there are in the world, and there's some really important things that you can get out of that. But how do you do it? And that's what we're looking at that. And then how do you take that data and analyze it and apply it to problems? And how do you bring people together to solve these big problems? And you might have heard about our Watson machine, which is a machine that you can talk to and create. It analyzes data from very disparate sources pretty quickly and comes up with solutions. So these are the areas where we're working this year. And these are the areas where we expect to commercialize technology. And we'll do it in a patent. We'll do patents. And we get royalties from patents. And this is really important. Royalties are really valuable to a company because that revenue goes straight to the bottom line. If you look at the profit, if you look at the IBM's annual report and you see the actual profit of the company, nearly a quarter of it comes from intellectual property revenue, royalties. So when you think about intellectual property protection, then this puts a pretty big, exclamation point on the value of intellectual property protection and enforcement. All right, so let me apply that general process to a particular technology area and use our work with us in the semiconductor area as an example of the type of collaboration that we try to lead. Semiconductor creation, research, development, manufacturing, very expensive, high levels of capital required, and so on. So what we've tried to do and what we have done is actually reach out across a variety of areas, from research to development to manufacturing, and who've worked to find partners who can share in this and bring their own assets to the table. And we've done this collaboratively up in New York State, and now I think the Albany, New York area is recognized around the world as one of the leading semiconductor technology areas, from nanotechnology all the way up into the highest end of manufacturing. And IBM has been a player there along the lines of collaborative innovation and commercialization. All right, so how am I doing for time? Okay? Okay?
Yeah, please continue. Please
All right.
continue.
Okay, so let me just wrap this up by talking a little bit about our business in China. So how does this all apply to a business opportunity in China? And this is, again, I'm using the IBM example, but I think it's one that is followed by many other companies as well. And I hope it's instructive and not just, I don't mean it to be just, an advertisement for the IBM company. So just by way of background, IBM has started working in China in 1934. And we stayed there through 1949, and then had a 30-year hiatus, and came back to China in 1979. And at that time, it was really we call it a strategic experiment. What could we do? Could we be successful in China in 1979? And our work there has evolved, and now we've gone from being a strategic experiment to a part of our globally integrated enterprise, and a major part of our globally integrated enterprise. And we have brought to China, and in China we have developed a research lab, a development lab. We do research in a whole variety of areas, from semiconductors to software to systems and technology. We take that kind of technology research and development and we apply it in our businesses. So that's why I have this little insignia around the global innovation component. We also do a lot of work in China on being part of the global enterprise in terms of procurement, in terms of we bring products in and we deliver products. It's a services and product-oriented business. We have all kinds of work there that addresses the Asia-Pacific market. And we have a number of business partners and branch offices. We have nearly 10,000 people in China, and it is a very important piece of our business. Now, let me just mention this to you. While we have a number of people in China, we also have a much larger number of people in India. You know, I was stunned to learn we have nearly 70,000 people in India now. And you know, what are the reasons? Well, there are lots of reasons why. One of them has to do with the software and development that we do in India is of a different nature than the work we do in China. But it also has to do with intellectual property protection and enforcement and how we approach our business. In many cases, depends on the regime of property and intellectual property enforcement that we see, and how companies or how countries affect that becomes a strategic differentiator for companies as they choose to invest. And I'll just leave that right there. Let me mention that we have a number of business partners, and this again is an example of the collaboration that we think is really important. We have nearly 10,000 business partners, and with them they bring in or generate a tremendous amount of our revenue in China. And we also work with our business partners and with our clients in education. And we have a number of university courses, as you can see on the chart here, over 340 courses that reach out to thousands of people, because we feel like if our clients understand the nature of the technology and the opportunity, we can participate with them much more effectively, and they'll be successful, and therefore we'll be successful. And so how we work with our partners and our clients together is very significant. And let me just close by laying out very briefly the foundation of this enterprise, and it really is our research enterprise in China. And we have a research lab in Shanghai. We have a research lab in Beijing. The Beijing lab has been around since 1995, and this is a fairly basic research lab. And in Shanghai, it's more of a market-oriented lab, and we have, you know, thousands of engineers that work in hardware, software, systems development, all the underpinnings, all the infrastructure that make it possible for us to create the solutions that ultimately our clients value. So that's kind of a run-through of how we look at commercialization as an American company. And I think I'd hope that I just left you with the notion that collaboration, globalization, global reach, working together, carefully protecting intellectual property, not setting national standards but global standards, because businesses look to the opportunity in China as a global opportunity and not just a national opportunity. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I'll turn it over to my host.
非常感谢
Thank you so much to our IBM representative for a very interesting brief. IBM is a very powerful company, and we can see that the commercialization of these products is not just a technical issue. It is also something that we need to have a model for operations, a good model for operations. Thank you. And now we would like to move next to Mr. Jiang Mingling from the COSC. In the past, he was in charge of construction as well as cement construction and application of those technologies. Today, he'll be talking about the commercialization of the results of scientific and technological research. Mr. Jiang. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you to everyone for being so patient to hear me as the last speaker this afternoon. I will be speaking appropriately about the relationship between economics and science and technology. We call it two different skins on your face in China, and you call it the Valley of Death. But basically, it is the issue of the commercialization of the results of science and technological research. I would just like to say that this morning, Minister Liu talked all about our system of innovation in China, but I will be talking specifically about the commercialization of these results. And I'll talk from the perspective of my 33 years of research and some of the things that I've seen in that exact process of the commercialization of these scientific and technological results. First of all, I would like to talk first about the commercialization of science and technological results and how it's an important part of the system of science and technological innovation. It's very important. We have to look at innovation in a more broad way. We have to look at the technical development, the commercialization, the popularization, and the utilization together and integrate it all into one system of scientific and technological innovation. And we don't want to see stovepiping of the subsystems involved. We want to encourage coupled systems and feedback between them. Only in that way will we be able to contribute better to economic and social development. That is our main goal. We cannot separate them all of the subsystems, because if we do that, then we're going to have two separate sets of skin, two faces, or the Valley of Death. A country's ability to innovate itself is really its ability to promote development during that given period in history by integrating scientific research, technological development, engineering, commercialization, popularization, and utilization. And it is that country's ability to turn all of those factors and resources into wealth. Basically speaking, it involves tying science and technology to economic and social development. Accomplishing the commercialization of the results of this research is an integral part and a key link in the chain to achieving science and technological innovation. Establishing and then improving a whole system and mechanisms within it for science and technological innovation is the basis for the commercialization of these results. This morning, Minister Liu gave a very systemic presentation on this. And so we already know from that the main innovators are the businesses. And we need to tie together the whole system with them being the main innovators. In this system of innovation in China, we can tell from this chart here that after many years of taking statistics that 70% of all R&D spending comes from industry. There might have been some misunderstanding in this number because our minister was saying that they are spending 70%. It's not the private sector that's 70%. When I say 70% coming from industry, that includes state-owned enterprises. It's the businesses, the industry. There have been a lot more R&D personnel recently than there were in the past. There's now 1.9 million of them. And research and development institutes have also, the number of them, that is up 90% from what it was 10 years before then. But there are still a lot of problems that exist. First of all, our ability to innovate is weak, our research capacity is weak, and our technological integration capability is weak. But the big thing is that we don't know how to open up new markets and commercialize. So we have to work on the following things toward all of those ends.
First, we have to enhance the innovation system, technological innovation system that centers around our businesses or companies. First, we have to have a management mechanism led by our business sector and have our business innovate, decide on their policies, and put more into R&D. Simply put, we have to use our enterprises or companies as the leaders. And secondly, we have to support enterprises to build their R&D infrastructure. We use national key labs as well as engineering research centers to this end. And thirdly, we need to support innovation within SME. We have to allow their advantage of lean, specialized, and young to come into full play. These are their characteristics, and we need to coordinate between SMEs and large enterprises to work together and innovate together. Fourthly, we need to perfect the operation system for the academia and the industry to work together. We need to have everybody know what their role is in this whole system and have a good division of labor, and also to protect IPR. This morning, Mr. Liu and Minister Zhang also talked about this, the connection between industry and our academia. We are now making efforts toward this end. We also need to deepen and continue to execute our technological innovative and programs. First, by using and enhancing our strategic alliances, where strategic new emerging industries can continue to develop and also at the same time upgrade our traditional industries. We need to build alliances and a good operation mechanism between our enterprises, universities, science and technology research centers, as well as public service units. And secondly, we need to enhance the deployment and construction of innovative platforms. We need to integrate resources and open up our services. We need to make sure that we don't make redundant efforts and avoid barriers. We need to make sure that these platforms don't contradict one another. And thirdly, we need to nurture or develop innovative enterprises or companies. In this very competitive market, we need to help and support enterprises that are in the most key sectors, most critical sectors in the society, so that they can play a leading role in their sector. We also need to develop a good environment that is conducive to innovation. First, the government should perfect and improve taxation policy surrounding technological innovation. Minister Liu talked about this in the morning, including tax deduction and loaning or subsidies policies. I am not going to go into details on those. You can look at the details on the slides. And secondly, we need to enhance our S&T legal framework. We are trying to build a country that focuses or pays greater attention to our legal framework. And thirdly is to enhance our IPR strategies. We talked about this in the morning. And number 4, we need to help scientific research centers and universities and companies to work better together. And number 5, we are encouraging our talents or our people to flow more smoothly between the industry and the academia. It includes universities and colleges to the industry as well as going abroad. This will help us provide even better services to our society. And the 6th is to better our service provided by our enterprises. Since reform and opening up, the State Council has been paying attention to this issue. We, on the one hand, is encouraging the system to be reformed so that our companies, our business sector can take the lead in innovation. A few years ago, in year 2000 actually, we canceled or abolished 10 central government institutions. We abolished the relationship between these department agencies with some scientific research centers. And these scientific research centers started their relationship with the private sectors. And these centers have become the core of R&D in these companies. And after 10 years of efforts, these research centers have become very important to our companies and enterprises, and they have helped our companies to become more competitive in the increasingly globalized world. In addition, in China, we now have some new type scientific research institutes that are very helpful to innovation in the society. There are many characteristics in these new type institutes. First, they reflect the fact that the academia and the research center, as well as the industry, are now integrating better compared to the past. And they work together not only in the basic research, but also applied research. They know very well the fact that innovation is the source and entrepreneurship or starting up companies is the goal. Particularly in our Pearl River Delta, you see many of these new type institutes. And the next is that we have to use international technological resources to provide better services. We need to introduce international standards and equipment into China. We learn from those international standards and reinvent or re-innovate. We insist on the principle of introduce from abroad and then go abroad afterwards. This is a combined sort of policy. And also, we ask our enterprises to go abroad as much as they can, particularly large-scale companies. We also try to create a better or more favorable investment environment in China so that more international companies would set up research centers in China. Just now, Ms. Kinscott pointed out the fact that IBM also has many research centers in China. And thirdly, very quickly, I will talk about the path and measures for commercialization in China. Based on our government policies, we insist on allocation of resources based on what's going on in the market. It's market-oriented when it comes to resource allocation. We have a guideline for S&T planning. We also have the 12th five-year plan. Based on the guidelines and the plan, each company and each business is required to develop their own S&T innovation projects. And secondly, we are trying to enhance all sorts of platforms for technological innovation. And thirdly, as mentioned, we need to enhance the strategic alliances between the industry, the academia, and the research center. As mentioned in the last presentation, this is a very important mechanism that aims at improving the R&D capability of our private sector. And also, we need a very robust legal framework to support these strategic alliances. And the fourth path is that we choose a scientific S&T discovery commercialization path. Well, there are different methods. First, looking at what's going on in the market, and they would innovate or invent by themselves. They do basic research, and they do engineering research or engineering R&D, and then they carry out a pilot line and improve that technology from then on. They would also later have to commercialize that technology if possible. And for introduced technology, what I was talking about was for our indigenous innovation. So for introduced technology, we need to introduce that technology, digest it, process it, learn from it, and then re-innovate. We have to talk to all relevant parties and upgrade and perfect that technology based on the conditions in China to form a new technology or a new product that will be promoted in the market. And the last point is that we should place even more emphasis on the management of S&T discovery commercialization. So large-scale enterprises and companies pay a lot of attention to how their products is doing in the market. They have to do post-evaluation or post-market evaluation to see how effective that service or that market or that product is. We need to enhance IPR protection for those products. We also need to improve the evaluation system of those discoveries, which has been talked about in the morning. We can't judge whether a technology is good just based on a paper or a thesis. We have to look at what kind of role or contribution it has made to the whole society. And we will do our best to protect the IPR of that technology so as to encourage the willingness and the creativity of our people. That is all I have for my presentation. Thank you.
谢谢蒋
Thank you, Mr. Jiang, for that presentation. Well, thank both speakers.
to finish sharply before 4:40. And nowadays, now there's about more than 20 minutes for discussion, question and answers. And please.
Thank you. This is to Mr. Zhang. Very interesting presentation. Thank you. I was noticing you had this one chart that showed between 2002 and 2012 a 90% increase. I assume that's in research in enterprises, research institutes in enterprises, and also a very significant increase in research personnel in enterprises. I'm wondering, in particular, how do you get high-level research personnel to work in industry? There's such a long tradition of really high-level people preferring to work in the Academy of Sciences or universities, not industry. How do you get them into industry?
Great question. Like I said, in our S&T innovation, a very important part is to encourage our people to flow between the industry and the academia. In year 2000, in the past, it used to belong to the government, but now they are research centers within enterprises or companies. So in that way, we can make sure that there are more research people in the industry. And also, in Pearl River Delta and Yangtze River Delta, there are many private companies which are very, very dynamic and prosperous. And their incentives, their own incentives within their companies, are sometimes even better than what is being provided by the government or by public research centers, meaning their pay is probably better than what's being paid by the government, and their operation is better too. For example, the organization that I used to work for had a lot of people who switched to the private sector, to the industry, and some of them even came to the United States and work in research institutes that are set up by China in other countries. So but I never think that we lost those people, because I think by only this flow can we really stimulate the whole sector, including the private and the public research institutes. So I think this flow is very important. It is a good flow. And because personally, I think SNT innovation or SNT competition really boils down to the people, the talents there. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
I think this interaction between the public and the private sector in researchers is an issue. I mean, in the IBM company, people typically don't go back into the universities unless it's at the end of their career, and there are a lot of reasons. You get in a career mode. You have certain incentives, pay, recognition, and so I think actually we have more interest in people from the university wanting to come into the private sector than vice versa. But I think exchange is good if you can make it work.
Those incentives, please.
I think our speakers, thank you so much for your presentations. And I think my question may appear strange, but I think there is some method to the question I'm about to ask. Mr. Jiang, actually, from reading from his biography, I realized that he has had tremendous experience in the cement industry. And in the cement industry, from my experience in China, there was a big push to actually introduce technology from abroad, to come up with cement production techniques that were less environmentally damaging and that were more benign in terms of global emissions, and that actually would result in a better product. Kathleen, you spoke about the challenges, the fact that IBM's revenue depends so much on royalties, and at times you're reluctant to engage in countries where there's not enough intellectual property protection because you're afraid that your royalties are going to drain. So the question that I have for both of you is, what has been your experience with regard to the cement industry in China, to the degree that they have been able or not able to actually protect intellectual property, because there's so many provincial enterprises that would like to produce cement with technology that may be appropriated from abroad. And what has been your experience, Kathleen, with IBM in terms of protecting intellectual property, in China now, as the economy is growing and people are becoming more aware of the necessity of actually protecting intellectual property?
Let me answer first. Thank you very much for that question. This is something that comes from my background. Indeed, the cement industry is the fastest growing industry in China, I should say.
In 2011, we reached 21 or over 2 billion for an output in terms of tons of it. But our own technology and economics were not as advanced as other countries, and that's the reason why we wanted to bring it in. We had a large demand, and so we had to bring it in from abroad. Since 1964, graduating from university, I was in the cement field. That's true. And we took it from a very backward type of process, type of technology, into a much more modern one, especially after 30 years of opening and reform in our country. So the technology did that. There are two ways, though, to accomplish things. I talked about that. First of all, is through indigenous innovation, to have our own technologies, our own manufacturing processes, our own know-how, to actually come up with it on our own indigenously. And I participated in plans 65, 75, and 83. I participated in projects to try to do that, to try to get our hands on key technologies, key capabilities, and work with key people to try in this area in China to try to use that path forward. And then after 1975, some countries who were more developed in this area than we were signed agreements with us, and then I'm talking about during the 7th fifth-year plan, not 1975, since then. And then after then, we got at least a guaranteed supply. And they were at least able to get a guaranteed market in China, so it was good for both of us. And then we got their technology, and then we were able to produce and manufacture locally after the 7th five-year plan and going forward from there. And then we digested and absorbed and tried to improve those technologies. And today, we are able to produce 12,000 tons per day. That's the output capacity that we're up to today. And there are some very key technologies or parts that we still are importing, but other than that, we are pretty much all indigenous in the process at this time. That includes design, it includes manufacturing, it includes installation, and there are large cement companies listed on the market, and we're talking about companies with 33% market share in this industry, and we're talking about companies from China whose products are very competitive. We're at that point today, so we took it from then to where we are now. In the area of protecting IPR, I talked this morning about that. From the perspective of the government, we attach a lot of importance to it. The industry has to abide by the commitments in its agreements with the technology transfers, and it has to be good for the rights of both parties. We've worked with Denmark, Japan, as well as Germany, and we have very wide cooperation with these companies in this area. In the cement industry, I'm sorry to say that, though, we haven't really had a lot of cooperation with the United States. I remember coming here, and at that time, the United States was sort of deindustrializing, and a lot of people weren't really interested in engineering. You didn't have people interested in cement engineering technologies, and I remember that. And even then, you already had lost your edge in the world in that area. You lost it to Denmark, Japan, and Germany. Thank you.
Let's see. My experiences with intellectual property in China is that things are improving. I visited our IBM Beijing lab on 3 occasions: 2007, 2008, 2009. I haven't been there since 2009, but just in that period of a couple of years, the situation in terms of intellectual property protection enforcement had gotten a little bit better. The issue was not so much the laws themselves, but how they were practiced, and how in a very large country, much of that enforcement takes place at a local level. And so how a particular jurisdiction chooses to enforce or not enforce becomes very challenging. And so, where you actually apply or where you actually invest and what kind of geography, where do you choose to go, has a lot to do with your experience in the jurisdiction in terms of enforcement. And I think that the trend is a positive trend.
Yeah, thank you.
Kent Hughes here at the Wilson Center. This is for Ms. Kingscott. If you were the chairperson of the IBM Investment Committee, what are the 3 things the United States to do to entice you to invest here? And what are the 3 things that China should do to entice you to invest there?
That's a good question.
Altogether 6 questions.
All right, wow. Okay, from an IBM point of view, I think in the United States, actually one of the most important issues has to do with the corporate tax rate. The United States has a very high corporate tax rate relative to other countries, and so this becomes a constant inhibitor. The United States doesn't have the right kind of immigration policy. We attract students from all over the world, and then once they get out of school, they go back to their home country, which we've just heard our Chinese colleagues encouraging that to happen, and I can understand why they would do that. So we need to change our immigration policy, and it's the old thing of stapling the green card to the graduation diploma. And another thing we need to do is we need to invest, I think, in the bridge programs some of which I mentioned, like the manufacturing initiative. We have in the United States a tremendous amount of public investment in R&D and private investment, but it's this whole bridging the gap, the commercialization gap needs to be, I think, supported more strongly. In terms of where do we go, or what are the decision criteria abroad? What would I improve in China? Well, I think I've already said it, intellectual property enforcement, right? I think having mandated, to the extent that there are mandated national standards as opposed to global standards. There was a WIPO standard a couple of years ago, telecommunications product standard. There was a national standard. That kind of technology standard setting is an inhibitor, because then you don't have a global brand. And companies want to have global brands. And I don't know what the third thing would be right now. I would have to say we've had a tremendously successful business in China. We're extremely pleased. The comments that were made earlier about Chinese students, we find with the people that we do business with, they care a lot, they work really hard, they are really committed to success. And so I think those kinds of characteristics, personal characteristics, really are useful for businesses as they look at the China market.
Yeah, that's great answer. I see many people smile with your answer. For the next, yeah, please.
科随着 going to Kensley， 刚才你做了一个非常好的一个。
You gave an excellent presentation. It really struck us, and we learned a lot from it. For instance, you were talking about the fact that innovation is not just one department. It's not just a technology. It's a culture. It's a whole culture. It's not just, what technology. It's what type of problem can be solved, and it's a whole service. And you were talking about a global vision, a global way of looking at things, and that type of an outlook. All of that is very good. Of course, you talked about a whole process that you go through in the whole area of innovation. And you do well globally in this area, your company, IBM. So what I wonder is, globally, you have R&D centers all over the world. Exactly how does your innovation cooperation operate? You have these 8 entities in all different countries. How exactly do you cooperate to innovate with them to make it the best result? Do you work differently to bring out the best advantages in different countries or areas? What do you do? How?
Thank you. That's a hard question to answer because it's not any one thing. So first we have a global arrangement of people, and we have global markets. And so we try to take advantage of the best skills that reside in the best markets. And because of technology today and the ability for people to connect very easily and to work together, we can bring teams together regardless of their geography. So actually this goes to a point around how we try to connect people. There are a lot of tools that we use internally in IBM Online where people put their profiles. I mean, everybody is supposed to put their profile online in our database. And so if I'm a team leader, and let's say I have a project to build in the smarter cities area, for instance, a traffic management project, I need a traffic engineer with the skills of how do you coordinate stoplights, for instance. I can look in our global database and try to find people who have those skills so I can get the best leaders in a whole variety of technical areas. And then I can create a virtual team. So we're not really limited to the skills that reside in one particular geography. What we're limited to is the skills that reside in our global IBM company. And so that gives you a much deeper and broader opportunity to find the right people. And actually, it enables organizations to replicate experiences in the market from one geography to another. So for instance, we look for clients who are leaders in a particular area. So for instance, if we believe healthcare is an area that electronic healthcare is really important. So we look for customers, clients who can become partners and who are leaders in their particular domain. And then we learn from each other, and we try to create really unique, valuable systems. And then we can apply those systems to other clients around the world. And so we lead by working with the best and the brightest in a particular domain and then replicating that with other clients around the world. Hope that helps.
Any on the back. This is the last question, please.
Question for Ms. King-Scott. A big theme of your presentation was your IBM's collaboration. IBM's innovation is very collaborative, and you have lots of partners. So, in your patenting of your products and services, do you do this in conjunction with your partners in the sense you have co-patents with your partners, or do you have technology transfer agreements with your partners? Is it very formal, or is it just sort of case by case?
Well, first I should say in the intellectual property world, nothing is informal. It's very formal and very carefully managed. But there is a tremendous amount of cross-licensing. In our business, in the information technology business, there is a huge amount of cross-licensing within the industry. So we, there is every kind of arrangement you can imagine. We have individual researchers, we have team researchers. Most of the patents are done within the IBM company. They aren't typically done with a variety of partners. However, there's a little bit of everything. I guess I shouldn't say there's only one thing or another. There's every kind of arrangement you can imagine, but they are very carefully constructed in a legal sense. And I'm sure that anybody who's worked with IBM lawyers knows that every T is crossed and every I is dotted, and it's a challenge, but it works.
好，由于时间的限制呢，
In the interest of time, that is all we have for this session. I would like everyone to give a big hand to the two speakers.